2 Timothy chapter 1, verses 1 through 5. You see the really absurd title. It is the introduction to a video for the song All Star by Smash Mouth. That song became popular through the movie Shrek. It's the intro song to the movie. But in the video, which is going to be our connection this morning, there is a table that is interviewing would-be superheroes and crime fighters. And one of them steps to the table, the father in the picture you saw, and says, "I am Pencilhead." And the other one says, "I am son of Pencilhead." And so they make reference to two generations of crime fighters. Now you think about that as parents. There is a measure of pride. It makes us feel pretty good to have our children follow in our footsteps, to continue a family line, maybe in a business. But I find it interesting that God does not consider two generations enough. When Jeff Johnson was here, and he was talking about the family, you know me, I was doing my thing. I was listening while at the same time I was writing, and I was digging, and I was running references, and I was making notes for future thoughts. And Marty and I talked about this right afterwards. One of the things I do as he's speaking, or anyone is I look at the context around it. Something that we emphasize. You know, what else is Moses saying in the text? What else is Paul saying in the text? And I start running references. And his key verses for that gospel meeting were what? Deuteronomy 6, 4 through 9. "Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one God. And you shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, and with all your might. And these words which I am commanding you today shall be on your heart." And then we got that family focus, and he zeroed in on it in every lesson in one way or another. "And you shall teach them diligently to your sons. You shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, when you rise up. Bind them as a sign on your hand, as frontlets on your forehead. Write them on the doorpost of your home and on your gates." And he did a really good job, and so I'm not repeating what he did. But I was doing my thing, and so I was looking at the verses around that text. And what struck me as Moses is setting up that Shema, that key set of verses that is in the heart of every Jewish boy and girl from the day they're old enough to recite it, was verse 2. "So that you and your son," the two generations we mentioned in our illustration. But notice that's not good enough for God. What's he say next? "And your grandson might fear the Lord your God, to keep all his statutes and his commandments which I command you all the days of your life, that your days may be prolonged." And so I read it and it caught my attention, and I went to the margin and I found a previous reference just a page or so back. Deuteronomy chapter 4. Verse 9, "Give heed to yourself, keep your soul diligently, lest you forget the things which your eyes have seen, lest they depart from your heart all the days of your life, but make them known to your sons and to your grandsons. Jeff really didn't focus on that, and so I'm going to. 3 generations. I started in Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 1. After that, and I began to read down to it, and I began to notice what is going on. Listen to me, Israel. Please, Moses begs, pay attention. Focus on what I'm saying. Listen to the statutes. Listen to the judgments, which I am teaching you to perform, in order that you may live. And go in and take possession of the land which the Lord, the God of your fathers, is giving you. Don't add to it. Don't take away from it. Your eyes have seen, verse 3. Verse 4, held fast. Verse 5, see, I've taught you. Verse 6, keep and do. You see, it hit me like a proverbial ton of bricks. And as I said, Marty and I discussed it. This is what struck me. Parents, God holds us. God holds a father as the leader of his home, and parents in general responsible for 3 generations of faith. He doesn't say that it's enough for me to know it and live it. He doesn't say that it's enough for me to know it and live it and teach my children. He said, you're going to teach your grandchildren. And as I was sitting there, if you had looked at me, the second ton of bricks landed. Austin just caught it. It was an atom bomb. Kim and I are about to add that 3rd generation around the first week of July. Wow. What a realization. I am about to be responsible for 3 generations of Christian faith and teaching. So let's dig. I kind of ran through it really quickly. Let's dig. Chapter 4, verses 1 through 9. What does he say? Verse 1. Moses said, I need you to listen to everything that I'm saying. If I'm going to be the father I'm supposed to be, if we're going to be the parents we're supposed to be, and we're going to teach our children, and we're going to teach our grandchildren, it has to come home first. I have to be one who listens to God. I have to be one who knows the statutes and the commandments. I have to know the plan of salvation. I have to know who Jesus is. I have to know what God has written for my learning. Thing ran off and left me. Continue in verse 1. He said, you got to perform them. I have to know them and I have to act on them. Verse 2, I can't mess with them. I can't change them. I can't add to what God has taught me, and I cannot take away from it. I'm not going to move to the right or to the left. I'm going to stay in the center of the faith that God has prescribed. Verse 3, I have to remember my history. What has God done for me? How did I get where I am? The blessings, at times the disciplines. Is that not what Moses tells Israel? Remember how you got here. Remember how you're standing on the edge of the promised land. It wasn't because of you. It's because God brought you here. Verse 5, again, do it. When you get into the land, continue to live these things before Him. Keep them and do them. He repeats in verse 6. See some weight? See some importance? Verse 9, 3 generations. You want to secure your legacy before God? Parents, teach your children. And then grandparents, teach your grandchildren. Chapter 6. where we spent so much time with Jeff. Verse 1, Moses repeats himself. Look, I've been commanded to teach you these things. Let this sink in. This is 2 chapters later, and he's already having to repeat himself. How necessary is it for God to continually put it in front of us? Because we so easily forget. We so easily turn away from. Verse 1, still, in order that you may do them. Still the emphasis on the action, the hearing, the acting on it. Verse 2, 3 generations. Verse 2, for you parents, do it. Don't just know it, do it. Fear Him and keep this all of your days. And do the same thing for your children. Do the same thing for your grandchildren. When you do that, you're going to be blessed. Israel's getting a land, and they're getting a land that they're going to get to stay in. We're looking toward an eternal land. And we're wanting to stay there, and we want to take our children and our grandchildren. So some observations about these things. Number 1, I'm responsible for myself first. I cannot teach my children and lead them the way I'm supposed to if my house is not in order. If I have not worked out my own salvation with fear and trembling, Philippians chapter 2. I have to make sure I am living the life that I am supposed to be living. So that when I teach them, it's not a contradiction to my life. And my life is not a contradiction to the book. So that they can see it in me. Number 2, parents, I do not think in our culture that we get this nearly as much as we should. I am responsible for my kids' spiritual situation. We play a pivotal role in the well-being of our children spiritually. We understand the responsibility we have to feed and clothe them. We understand the responsibility that we have to get them to school and to educate them. We understand the responsibility our culture has for us to play taxi to everything they want to do. But does it really register when we pillow our heads at night that when we leave this life and stand before God, we will answer for whether or not we have passed down our faith to that next generation? We cannot leave it to chance. We cannot bring them to worship with us, line them up like little ducks in the row next to us, and hope it sinks in. We cannot leave it to them to make up their minds. We cannot leave it to society. Oh, well, it takes a village to raise a child. If you let the village raise your child, you lost your child. Now, a Christian family can be involved in it, absolutely. But if we let this village around us rear our children, we've denied our responsibility and we have lost our children. We cannot leave it to the church. We can put every program in the world in place. We can hire godly men to teach our children as teens. We can provide Bible classes and lads to leaders, and we can do Bible Bowl, and we can teach them to speak in the public. And yet the amount of time that we spend with them is minimal compared to the amount of time our children spend at home and our children spend in the world. We cannot leave it to the church. I must teach everything handed down by the Lord to my children. And then number 3, that proverbial ton of bricks a couple of weeks ago, I have to teach it to my grandchildren. I am responsible for that next generation. And the truth is that responsibility does not stop with my grandchildren. It would include great-grandchildren and great-greats if I live long enough or whatever. See, Moses could have continued this family tree. But the point was already made. There was no need to. He had established the principle. This is a generation to generation to generation thing. And as long as you live, you're continuing to pass it on. Now, I'm going to make a 4th observation in a minute. But let's address a question. Actually, that's his newest thought. It's a newer thought. I had one standing right there when Chester was reading that blew me away. And so we're going to add 2. Let's ask a question. Why 3 generations? It's hard enough to take care of my own spiritual house. It's hard enough to take care of my life and keep myself in line. And I understand the need to teach my children, but God, why 3? Why 4? Why 5? Why are you looking at me and assessing how far down the line I'm passing this faith? I mean, in theory, if I take care of myself and I teach my kids, shouldn't they automatically be doing the same thing and picking up and running with it? In theory, should I not be able to pass that responsibility on to them? Not according to the Lord. So what's his reasoning? Why? Well, A, kids need as much godly advice and teaching as possible. They need it from every direction. Our world is bombarding them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week with garbage. They need as much godly influence as possible from every godly person in their lives. B, if I keep growing in my faith simply because of age and maturity level and the amount of time I've had to be a child of God, and I keep growing in knowledge, and I keep growing in wisdom, and I keep growing in fear, I will, at least in principle, stay ahead of my kids. So I will always have something more to teach my kids. And I will always have something more to teach my grandkids if I'm doing my job. And so why sit back and wait on them to have to learn it on their own? C, even perfect parenting does not mean my kids are guaranteed to stay faithful. Perfect parenting does not mean my kids are going to pass it on or whatever. I mean, God is the perfect parent, and most of His humanity turned out rotten. And so don't leave it to chance. Don't leave it to chance that my kids are going to do what they're supposed to do. If my grandchildren are in my life and I have the opportunity to influence them, don't leave it to chance that mom and dad are doing what they're supposed to do. Use the time to teach and to mentor. Number 4, the second generation, sadly, is not always available. Life happens. Death happens. So where's the response? Well, mom and dad aren't here, so that next generation just doesn't get taught? No, God's already established the principle. E, retirement for the Christian comes in the next life. there is no point in this life where my responsibility to teach and to mentor stops. I keep at it. And if I'm going to keep at my Christian life, if I'm going to continue to grow in fear, in knowledge, in wisdom, and in action, what better place is there to practice my teaching than in my home? What good's it going to do me to go try to win the world if I lose my own? Now, back to our observations. We said what? Number one, I'm responsible for self. Number two, I'm responsible for my children. Number three, I'm responsible for my grandchildren. And this one hit me kind of recently. Number four, there is no point where my kids get old enough. See, I've only have one of the three here today, so I'll make eye contact with him. There is no point where my kids get old enough, wise enough, or strong enough in their faith that I can hit cruise control. I am responsible for continuing. And what, our oldest is 27? I am responsible for continuing to teach both my children and at the point that they get here, their children. And if I do not do it, if I quit at any point in that process, I'm accountable to God. I answer for it. Am I responsible for their decisions, their choices, their actions? In a sense, no. Ezekiel says the father's not going to be held accountable for the sins of the son's not going to be held accountable for the sins of the father. But I am responsible for doing everything I can to continue to provide them with the tools to make the right decisions. So there's never a point, no matter how old you get, child, that mom and dad should stop passing on wisdom. Parents, keep teaching. Your kids get married and move out of your house, keep teaching. When they do get married and move out of your house, physically, what's the first thing that happens, Lloyds? They call back. How do I fix my car? How do I put this door back on my house? How do I crank my lawnmower? Well, they need that advice. They need that help. No matter how much we try, there are going to be gaps in our physical teaching as they grow up. What does that say about our spiritual teaching? When they call home, there needs to be more than just, this is how you winterize your lawnmower. Kids, listen to me. We're all kids of somebody. That's how we got here. Keep listening. There is never a point where you get too smart, too wise, too in awe of God, that somebody older and more mature does not have something worth sharing. Does it work? It worked in 2 Timothy 1 verses, sorry about the typo, verses 1 through 5. Paul looks at Timothy and said, I know your faith. And guess what, Timothy? I know where you got your faith. It started with your grandmother, and then it came through your mother, and now it's yours. But now this realization I had when Lloyd was reading, oh my, this blew me absolutely away. Children, does it ever get to the point that we quit learning? Paul is writing to whom? Timothy. Timothy is what? How does he describe him? Pardon? Paul's son. Paul's child in the faith. Now then, you read down, you get to 5. I know your faith. You get to 6. What does he tell him? You have had me lay hands on you. You have the Holy Spirit. You have everything you need. Now I'm going to write you a letter and tell you what you need to know. If Timothy had to have 2 letters from the Apostle Paul to grow up as his child in the faith and continue to learn, even though he had the Holy Spirit, even though he had the gifts, even though he is a powerful, powerful worker in the kingdom of God at this time. What does that say about us? What does that say about what we have to continue to pass down to that next generation and that next generation? There's never a point, even though it doesn't cross my mind every day, there's never a point where after 12 years I have quit wanting to call my dad and ask for advice about one thing or another. Isn't that right, Chris? Kids, while you have that opportunity in this life, no matter how old you get, don't waste it. And parents, no matter how old you get, don't waste the chance to change this next generation. Because our world is a scary, scary place. And we're going to address an issue tonight that our young people are facing today that we as adults never thought would touch our world. And they need the ammunition for that. Do we have it? And the question this morning is, are we passing it on to them? 3 generations is the minimum God mentions. Are you doing your job? Are you doing your job as a parent, as a grandparent, and as a child and a grandchild? It's Mother's Day. You've come to visit. You look back and you realize that this is the first time you've been to church since last Mother's Day. Or you look back and even though you're going every week, you realize your life's not what it's supposed to be. The relationship's not what it's supposed to be with mom and dad. You're not learning. You're not growing. You're not a faithful child of God. You look at your life and realize, I never obeyed the gospel no matter how much mom and dad taught. What a gift today is for you to be alive, for your mother to have you here. And if you need to make your life right, there's no gift in the world that you can give her better this morning than to respond to the invitation as we stand and sing.